Hello everyone, and how is it going? Today we're going to be looking at the Cedec presentation about the Blue Protocol's animation appearance or anime appearance and the techniques used to make it. So for those who do not know, Cedec is a conference in Japan called the Computer Entertainment Developers Conference, similar to the GDC in America. And at that conference, Bandai Namco presented about the techniques used to make the anime look of Blue Protocol. For this video, I'm going to be using the Famitsu article, which covered the summary of the presentation. So first of all, when making a game that has, I guess like kind of a cell look, if you're like originally, if you think of like anime, you would think like a kind of like a cell shaded kind of look. And when you think of that, what comes up is taking away details and giving it kind of a rough, compacted kind of look. But those preconceptions actually were a large obstacle that they had to overcome when making the game. So to get rid of those preconceptions, they went with a different approach. They decided that they're going to have the idea of making a game where you enter the world of like a anime movie. So that's what they're imagining when making this game. So you have like an anime movie with very, I don't know, like vibrant and detailed world, and you're able to step inside of that. So once that was decided, they had some of these concept arts that they wanted to create in the game. So these were like the original kind of concept arts they had. And this is what they actually created that we can see in game, which is very close to some of like their ideas that they had. So once the direction of the graphics were decided, they needed to work on the concept of the world, or what kind of world that they're going to have. So the art director originally heard that it was supposed to be like science fiction, kind of online RPG. But if you listen to the story a little bit closer, there weren't too many science fiction elements, so to speak, and it was more focused on like swords and magic, along with like this ancient civilization that once existed. So with that in mind, he decided to look at, for example, what happens if you had a 16th century knight that all of a sudden came across like this new technology, highly advanced technology, and if they were to make like a space suit, what would happen? So they like these two, I don't know, like separate ideas, or like something that usually wouldn't come together. What happens if they were to combine? And he came up with this concept art over here. So from there, they continued with ideas of how they want the art to appear in the game and the concept of the world. So they mixed some like modern fashion elements and things together, and they came up with these styles of clothes that we actually see in game. And these are a little bit different than the, I guess, average, like fantasy world. Something a little bit more unique. So once they got the concept of the world decided, the next problem was having that like cell kind of look with a free camera. If you have like an anime, everything's already decided what direction the camera, it only can look in one direction, the direction of the scene they're making. But in a game, you can go all directions, and how they needed to overcome that obstacle. So down here, let me just read through this one more time. Yeah, they're saying that the cell look and free camera, there's no like really good way to put them together. But how can they keep that like anime kind of look while doing that? But I guess, yeah, they're saying, so like for people that have already seen like the character creation screen or the skills in game, they were managed to replicate that kind of look. So like in the character creation, you have these like portraits of various angles of the character, and it looks very anime-like. And with the poses and everything. And for this, also in the game, they wanted... This is not an in-game screenshot, but this is what they were going for. They wanted different expressions. And to do this, they decided to put the bones in the character to allow for different expressions to be used. And then down here we have the effects. This is what the effects look like in game. So by doing this, they were able to make it feel like you're adventuring inside of an anime. So as for the specifics of what they were doing, they have this next section here. The first about the look of the characters. They're going to talk about the process they came to create the look of the characters. First up is the outline, which is kind of important for this like anime kind of look. Sometimes games don't have it, but for this game they wanted it. And to do that, they use a few different techniques. First up, we can see the outline here. So no outline and with outline. They decided to use also post-processing way to do it as a way to cut down on model size and normal costs or normal adjustments, so the normal direction in the vertices of the model. So this is using a post-processing effect to draw the outline. And to do this, they took, for this, the general outline, they have a depth. They used depth of the character compared with the background to get the outline. And from there, they were able to draw the outline around the character. But the problem is, with just using the depth, they were not able to get the inner details, which we can see over here. So to next get the inner details, they decided to compare the vertice colors, the vertice face colors. So to do that, I believe they took the brightness levels and compared it, and the larger the difference, the darker the line they used, which allows them to get outlines around the inner details in the character. However, that still didn't cover everything. You have things that are the same color and without too much depth difference. You don't get any lines along like this arm area. So to do that, they use the world normal. So by using the world normal, you can get the direction of which the face of the polygon is and look at the differences to draw the lines. We can get like around the arm here. But they still had a problem with the face. By using the world normal on the face, they got lines that they didn't want, and the depth didn't work as well either. So to do that, they prepared a model for the outline. So they took the approach of using like the backside of like a head model and enlarging that in the normal direction, and also adjusting normals with a tool to make sure they didn't go in a weird direction so they could get some clear outlines. So yeah, for the head, like around the chin, mouth, ears, and also the hair, they used that model approach where they took a different model and enlarged it in the normal direction, which allows them to get the clear outlines in these like detailed areas. And then continuing on, we're looking at the shading approach. So for the boundary areas, they decided to not use... Now, 1 second, let me just read through this real quickly. Oh, they just said that for the normal map, they decided not to use DDS compression because block noise affects the boundary areas negatively. They didn't use, they also for the boundary parts, they didn't use gradation. And then in addition, for the light and darkness contrast, or like the light and darkness ratio, it originally went with like 5:5, so 50% for dark light shading. But the problem is that the characters would become too dark when like looking at the backside, like against the light. So they decided to adjust the ratio to 7:3. 7:3 up here, which allowed for some more light to come through and make the character pop a little bit more. So it brightened up the game a little bit more, but made the characters feel a little bit more distinct. Next is the shading. So about the shading color, they had, in order to reduce work cost and data size, so the color used for the shadows, like diffuse color, was generated automatically. But just reducing the brightness could make it kind of a muddy appearance. So they adjusted the hue, slided the hue away a little bit, and by doing that they were able to reduce the brightness some, but keep the saturation around the same amount. I believe that's like the saturation around the same amount. That's what they went for. So these kind of areas are where the shading color is coming in. Next up is the rim light. So the rim light is something that has the light on the outside of the character. And a common approach is to use the model's normals. But the problem with that is they couldn't get a even line for the rim light. Depending on the area, the line size would change, and they didn't want that. So they decided to use the post-processing outline. From the post-processing outline, take that and generate a even line for rim lights. So we get an even rim light line going around here compared to over here where some of the sizes change depending on the area. And also they had it so light doesn't come in from the bottom. Right here there's no rim light along like the coat. And next up is another problem that about lighting in the game, because there's a day-night cycle and the main light source of like the sun can move. The sun could be above the character, and if lighting was to happen just from that angle, you'd get a look of a character like this, with light coming in from above and getting a not too pretty appearance. Doesn't look too anime-like. So in order to compensate for that, they took 50% angle reduction and moved the light down to keep the light in a good area for the appearance of the character. The actual light's coming from above, but when shading like the face here and the skin, they moved it down, so you get a clearer appearance. Next up, they talked about the hair specular. highlights. The hair specular highlights are these lines that we can see here. This is what they wanted to aim for. Whereas you get along to the outside edge of the camera, the specular highlights elongate vertically. So you have these like circles along the hair, and as you get to the outside, they elongate vertically. But there was a number of problems that they encountered when trying to do this. First, if they were to just use the same UV map as the hair, the amount of detail for the specular highlight areas would be, I guess, too little, and it would become pixelated. So they prepared another UV map for the hair. And that's as we see here. So the specular highlights are here. And they prepared another UV map just for the specular highlights of the hair. And another problem was, yeah, so for direction, figuring out the direction of how to elongate the highlights. So they want to go in just two directions from like, they don't want to elongate to the side, but just vertically here. So in order to do that, yeah, so, but yeah, like on this UV map, the directions are all over the place. So you have some going to the side, some going like vertically. So it's hard to figure out what direction that the highlight should scale up. So in order to figure out the direction, when they imported the texture, they found the centers of the various highlights. And based on the distance from that, they were able to move the UV and scale it in that direction. And by doing that, they were able to have smaller highlights in the center here and larger highlights on the outside. And here is a map of this area would be smaller, and as you get to the outside, they want larger highlights. And they were able to keep a clean look for the highlights that weren't pixelated because they had a separate map for it. Next up is about character creation. Yeah, so they had the character set up like positioned in multiple areas. And they took like a picture of that as a 2D texture and then displayed it on the screen. Yeah, just taking various angles of it and presenting them all at once. As for another thing for character creation is for clothing, in order to cut down on modeling costs, they wanted to have everything together as one asset. So by looking, for example, looking at like the image down here, in regards to like having like a coat, or like the glove has 4 different locations, or 4 different lengths. You could have it here, 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 or here. So they allow different positions where things could come. And parts that conflict with each other, they would make invisible to turn off the display of those. So next up is the expression. So we saw the image earlier on, which is what they wanted to go for expressions. I think it goes up here. Right, so they want to have these kind of various different kinds of expressions that the characters can make. So in order to do that, and so yes, what is it? There's going to be a number of characters on the screen at once. And in order to cut down on data costs, they decided not to use blend shapes, but to go with bones and they decided that early on in development. So for like the eyebrows, there's around 37 different bones. For the eyes, there's 42. In the mouth, there's 53. And around the edges and like the nose, yeah, there's 18 more bones. So quite a number of bones just in the face here for the expressions. What do they say? A total of 150 different bones for expressions. But it allows them to make these various different expressions as we see here. And by, what is it, they use different parts for the eyes and mouth as well. And by combining those different parts and like the bones, they were able to have around 25 different expressions. Next, we're going to be looking at the effects here. One interesting thing they decided to do with the effects is they decided not to have transparent effects as often seen in games. For comparison, we have a transparent effect on the right and then an opaque effect on the left. And the opaque one, they felt like fit better with the anime look they were going with. The game, the world, it blended in better with the world and the character. So they decided not to go with the transparent, but go with the opaque effects. Because it, just better fits overall into the world. And it has that anime kind of look. But the problem is it affects the gameplay some. And in what way it affects it, you can say is, well, if everything's opaque, you can't see anything. So they decided to call the effects based on distance. So as you get closer to the effects, they disappear, as we can see over here. But it allows the effects still to come out, but them to be cut down and allow for visibility. Another problem they had with, they needed to overcome was, for a lot of effects, you have this like order of how they appear. But when it comes into a 3D world, and you look at it all from this, like all different angles, if it's just rotating with the camera like a billboard, it feels a little monotonous or like simple. It just feels a little bit off, and the players might want a little bit more. So no, make the effects feel a little bit better when looking at different angles. They decided to use two different things here. First is a flow map, and another is a dissolver. And yeah, so the flow map gives it a gives some direction to it, and then the dissolver just kind of dissolves the different areas, but allows for it to have a little bit more unique appearance from all different sides. And then it makes the loop of the animation not stand out as much without removing the anime look of it. Another thing they did is they had a Fresnel. They use a Fresnel like highlights around here. So like in regards to the camera, you have these areas on the edges of the model. And these are the areas that you can get a value from, of having like a high Fresnel value. And in those areas, they decided to use coloring. So in those different areas, they colored it, and it created this kind of image. And this looks different depending on what angle you're looking at, because it depends on the camera angle to the object. Another thing they had is a Vertex movement material, which they use for these type of effects when like swinging the sword and whatnot. Another interesting thing here is you can look at this effect from any angle and it looks good. if you just had a normal 2D texture, if you were to look at it from front, it would be like invisible because it would just be thin. So to overcome that, what they used was this like bagel-like shape that they put the effect on, and they also morphed like the shape of the bagel here. So the front part of it would be squashed as the effect moved. So the bagel kind of shapes with the effect as it moves. And that allows this shape here allows for the effect to be looked at from any angle. Alright, and then next up is looking at, one moment here. So yeah, another important thing for things for like anime creation is the final color adjustments, screen gradation, and things like flares and whatnot from attacks. And if they're going for a high quality anime-like appearance, they wanted to be able to add these to the game. So they use like the same techniques used in the creation of anime. They wanted to replicate those in the game. One thing in particular was something called para, which is when coloring the cells of like an anime, it would be like in order to remove the flat feel of it, there would be some gradation added to it. And we can see that here. They upped the, this is a post-processing effect, but they upped the effect by 10 times, so we can see it in the image. But this above part here is what they were replicating, like that para or like gradation to the screen. And this is goes along with like a lens flare, so like the sunlight, sunbeams and whatnot. Maybe not the lens flare, just like the sunbeams, like the sunlight. Oh, and okay, it was sun flare. I apologize. Yeah, so like the sun flare or like the sunbeams and whatnot, it goes along with that. So it kind of moves depending on the angle of the sun. But another problem is if you have something like this appearing on the screen that's dependent on the sun, what happens if you're in a cave? So in order to overcome that, they had programmers be able to put a value on how much the character or how much the camera is in a shadow area. So like in those shadowed areas, they were able to get rid of these sun-based effects. And also another thing they did is, well, you have this for like the middle of the day, but they had I believe like 4 different processing effects based on time of day. So early morning, day, evening, and night. And they would blend them based if it's like overlapping time parts. Next up is the approach they used to give it a hand-drawn kind of feel. So they did use physics-based rendering for the game, but they didn't want the realistic or photorealistic appearance. Like on this right side, it says NG, which means like no good. But they don't want this like very highly realistic, but something more like the details lessened down. Less details and give it a more hand-drawn kind of feel. So in order to do this, well, first they had the assets made like in ZBrush here. We have like a high, what was it, like 2 million polygons. And I brought that down to like around 2,000 or so. But they kept the main shape of the object. But in order to give it the hand-drawn kind of feel, they put emphasis on the textures. Originally, they were using Photoshop, but a problem is if you're going for a hand-drawn kind of feel, like anime-like, kind of feel. There could be difference in quality and appearance based on the artist. You have multiple artists trying to make textures for multiple different objects, but one artist could make one appearance and another artist's texture could be quite different, and that could affect the cohesiveness of the game world. So instead of using Photoshop, they decided to use a Substance Painter. And the reason for that is that materials and filters and generators can be shared. So they could use similar different types of like filters and things among multiple different textures to give it a cohesive kind of feel. For example, they have one barrel here, which wasn't good, but using some of the filters and whatnot they prepared within Substance, they're able to apply blurs and whatnot to give it a more dulled down kind of feel. There's too much detail in the wood here, so they got able to remove the detail with some of the things they had within the Substance Painter. So it was, remove the sharp filter, put a blur and mosaic filter on, and it allowed it to create this kind of appearance that they could apply not to just one texture, but multiple textures. Another thing that they did for objects is having the edges of objects stand out more than things in the real world, I believe. Yeah, so a little bit more than like real objects, have the edges emphasized a little bit more, but not just a straight up line going around it. Have it, to make sure not just to have it just a straight line along the edge, but something that had a little bit more like wear and tear to give it a more natural kind of feel. That's something else to put emphasis when making the textures. Another thing that they worked on when making the game is the Grasslands. So what they did for the Grasslands is based on the distance from the camera, they would reduce the texture color information of the grass areas, add various color blotches to the grass to give it some differentiate or give it some more variation. And also add some highlights to give it a look like the wind's blowing through it. So just a basic grass with like nothing really added to it. Reduce the color of the grass farther away from the camera. Add blotches to different areas, as well as up close, and make the blotches smaller or like more common, more frequent, closer to the camera, and larger farther away from the camera. And also add some highlights to the grass. I believe it's a little bit harder to see in this image, but you can kind of have highlights in the grass as like the wind kind of blows through it. And that gives it an appearance of a kind of the anime kind of look they were going for. So instead of just this straight up image here, you have it an image that feels blends in a little bit more with the anime kind of look they were going for. And other things they kind of did for the game is also reduce the details of these cliffs and whatnot, things farther away. They would take pixels around the area and take the averages of the pixels to give it a little bit more flatter look, to make it a little bit more hand-drawn. So deliberately reducing details in some areas to give it a hand-drawn feel. But overall, this is a presentation they made about the anime look and the approaches they took to make it in the game. So that's everything for this article and also the Cedec presentation about the anime look. If you enjoyed the video, let me know. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.